Hi, everyone. I think I was muted for a little bit. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mario Lopez. I am the Civic Engagement Manager for Silicon Valley at Home. Today's webinar is part of our month-long series of events as part of Affordable Housing Month in May as a way to raise public awareness about affordable housing and homeless prevention solutions. This webinar will delve into the intersection of the 2020 census and how data from the census is derived to determine federal funding for affordable housing and homeless prevention programs. This includes programs such as the low-income housing tax credits, Section 8 housing choice vouchers and housing assistance payment programs, the community development grants, and in general supportive housing programs for veterans, senior citizens, and persons with disabilities and more. As our nation and region respond to the effects of COVID-19 pandemic and begin to think about economic recovery efforts, federal funding for affordable housing and homeless prevention programs will become more critical than ever, especially in our high cost of living region. The current pandemic has exacerbated the existing housing and homelessness crisis that had already reached a boiling point. Thousands of Silicon Valley residents who were already feeling financial stress before COVID-19 have lost their jobs in the last few weeks and are struggling to pay their rent, mortgage, and are on the brink of facing displacement. And so today we are going to be joined by the director of the California Complete Count, Director Ditas Katagi, to tell us more about her role as the director managing the census operations throughout the state and the importance of ensuring everyone being counted. We will follow up with a brief Q&A with her before she has to hop off, and then pivot to a presentation by Marcy Kaplan, who is a member of her staff. And then we'll go ahead and pivot again and turn it over to Miguel Santiago, who is a community outreach specialist with the Santa Clara County Office of the Census. Director Katagi, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being with us. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got into your current role, and what's at stake for the census in 2020 here in California.
Great. Well, thank you, Mario, for inviting me here today and to have the opportunity to join you. So this is actually my third decennial census, and I will say that it's the most challenging. So we thought 2000 was challenging. We thought 2010 was even more challenging. We did our best to think about earthquakes and wildfires and what could possibly happen. I have to say that a global pandemic was not high on the probable things that could happen. So our partners and our team have been fantastic. And you guys are all part of our team as well, partners that are doing great work out there to ensure a complete count. So I will say that Californians are facing an incredibly challenging time. COVID-19 has made a huge impact on life as we know it. And we're facing health risks, loss of loved ones, financial hardship, and a lot of uncertainty about the future, which can be frankly very stressful. But amidst all of this, the nation is undertaking the once-in-a-decade task of counting every person in the United States. And to be clear, the decennial census is a federal operation, and I work for the state, for Governor Newsom, and so does my team. But the federal operations, its accounting is actually done by the US Census Bureau. It is the largest peacetime operation conducted by the federal government. And our office, which is the California Complete Count Office, works to support their effort, to do outreach, educate and motivate, and to really lead this campaign targeted on those Californians that are most likely to be missed. It's really what we call our hardest to count Californians. And as we look at the data, we've determined there's about 11 million hard to count, like the hardest to count Californians in our over 40 million, population here in the state. Just for some perspective, 11 million would be as if the entire state of Georgia were hard to count. So people, we live here in California and we know we're like awesome state, but I think sometimes we forget how much smaller many of the other states are, or how probably easier it is for other states to get counted. And that's why, the governor and the legislature really has invested in this effort, because we know Californians best. The people that all of you today that you advocate for, renters, people who are underhoused, living in overcrowded units, people who are experiencing homelessness, they're all part of this hard to count community. that our office is charged with motivating, activating, and responding to the census. I will note that, I always talk about the barriers that we face, and that is there's motivational barriers because people just don't know or just don't really care about the census, but there's also structural barriers, and that is the way that the U.S. Census Bureau has designed or has been enumerating folks is it presents structural barriers. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later. Marcy's on my team is going to talk about enumerating people experiencing homelessness, and she'll point out some of those structural barriers that we're lucky to have partners like all of you to work with to figure out how to best reach them. But as we stay at home to save lives, one simple thing we can all do together is complete the 2020 census. You just take a few minutes to fill it out. Californians, by filling this out, we can help our families, our neighbors, and our communities. It's a simple, confidential, 9-question survey, and it secures millions to come back to our communities' support programs that are so important. But we know it's not as simple for millions of Californian households. So again, you're going to hear from the California Census Office's Sector Program Manager, Marcy Kaplan, and why the census matters in more detail around the issue of how it impacts housing. But some good news to share today is that Santa Clara and several other Bay Area counties are showing super strong returns already. The statewide rate is 60.9%, which is above the national rate, which is only 59.7. Santa Clara is at 69.6. It's the second highest in the state, very close to exceeding the 2010 total self-response rate already. So good job, you guys, but more work is always to be done. We want to get as close to 100% as possible. Probably, the Census Bureau is going to get us to 100%, but the closer we can get in terms of self-response, the more accurate the data is going to be. But with so much changing about field operations for the Census Bureau, who is obviously responsible for counting those, we want to get as many responses by August 14th as possible. So they've had to extend their timelines. If we hadn't had shelter in place, right now folks would be knocking on doors, but because of shelter in place and some operational changes, they've extended that time period for folks to self-respond till August 14th. After August 14th, if you don't answer, the Census Bureau is going to send people out to knock on doors. So that's important to know. If we can really motivate folks now in the next 8 weeks or so to answer and ensure that they get counted, would really be super helpful, and it's so critically important. So the census, which is mandated by the Constitution, determines how billions of dollars of federal funding are distributed to every state for education, affordable housing programs, nutrition and health services, and more. It estimates, the estimates show that for every person counted or missed, or what we call uncounted, California can lose $1,000 per year for the next 10 years. That's as much as $10,000 per person of funds that are lost this decade. So, I always say, why is it important? It's about money, it's about power, and it's about data. So that's kind of the money piece. But really, when we look about the power piece, it's about California's political representation in Washington, D.C. So those final counts, when they're done, they go to the president, and then they go to the clerk of the Congress, and they reapportion those 435 seats. And I'm sure you guys are aware of some of those bills that they discuss in Washington, D.C. can lose by 1 or 2 votes. And so if California loses a congressional seat for the first time in the history of it being a state, that would be I think a setback in terms of really having that strong voice to represent how diverse and wonderful California is. But also the data is used to redistrict as well, all the way down to like your city council and your school boards use that data. So it's really important to have complete as well as accurate data, and having people answer is probably the best way to get it most accurately. So because of that importance of both power and money, and then the final one is data, it's really about how is the data used? Well, foundations use the data in order to figure out where they fund things, and organizations, and how bad an issue, a problem is, or how they want to do it. Businesses use the data to figure out where they're going to locate their next their next, store to provide jobs. And I always like to tell the story about when I was just like 10 or 11, one of my best friend's father got swept away in an ambulance. I think he had survived, suffered a stroke or something. And I didn't know at the time. And so he had to go to an emergency room, but it was farther away than it should have. And if he had just reached an emergency room that was closer, 10 minutes closer, he would have suffered less damage. So, when we think about data, it seems kind of like, what does it really mean? But personally, it can have really a personal impact in terms of where are those health facilities, and will you be able to get your loved one, to get that care that they need a lot quicker. So, when we talk about data, it's really, I like to personalize it. So knowing all that power, money, and data, that's wá the governor and the legislature set aside an amazing amount of dollars, $187 million, to really fund partners who are trusted messengers across the state to educate, motivate, and activate the hardest to count of all Californians. We work through local governments, through tribal governments, and community-based organizations, and the media. And the state is trying to fund outreach work that will complement what the U.S. Census Bureau is doing, but also to take into account those structural operations that may discourage our Californians, our hardest count Californians, from responding. So when the U.S. Census Bureau is reaching every household through a nationwide campaign, you guys have probably seen their wonderful ads, our targets are our sort of focused energy, are targeted and data-driven to reach our hardest to count. And I'm so thankful to have partners that really understand the communities and the barriers that they may face. But without a doubt, COVID-19 has altered our ability to safely conduct person-to-person outreach. We have been in the planning for over 2 years, and a big part of our efforts and what we funded our community-based partners was to open these questionnaire assistance centers right there in the communities that are considered hardest to count. And that was where that person-to-person interaction and education and the ability to help people actually fill out the form is going to happen. But as we know, with shelter in place, that can't happen right now. And so our partners have been very innovative and have, what I have to say, taken a left turn to try to figure out how to still reach our hardest to count whilst remaining safe. So they're adjusting their tactics, both using what I say sort of traditional as well as sort of high-tech. This example here of this Zoom virtual convening here is just an example. We also know that there's immense pressure on our public services, and it's never been more important to count every single Californian. So we want to make sure that our folks who perhaps are caught in that digital divide, because you can answer the census in 3 ways. You can answer online, you can answer over the telephone, and you can answer by paper. In fact, I think I have my form right here. We want to make sure that folks have every opportunity to do that. So with our new partners, our partners being new and innovative, they've gone from this phone banking, doing a lot of these online virtual events, but they're also, putting things at school lunch and emergency food banks. They're also hanging posters in grocery stores or lawn signs, so in gas stations and places where there's only some places you can go, where a pharmacy or where those services are. So that's a good place that our partners have been doing it. And we're wearing T-shirts, and I've got my Census for All T-shirt to giving those to clerks to wear. But you're gonna hear more about that from your local partners who are doing amazing things out there. Again, Marcy Kaplan from our census office is going to be able to share more about strategies and tactics to reach the underhoused and why the census is so critical to housing issues. We wanted to just queue up an issue for any affordable housing developers that are out there. Some of the stuff that you might have built and developed and now people are moving into. The census sends the invitation to a master address file that was compiled in 2018. And so if you built something in 2019, there was this new construction update. And so I'm hoping that you guys were able to get all your new affordable housing areas on there. But those new addresses for the developers out there, those folks did not receive an invitation in March or April. So they didn't get the first like 4 mailings. They did get a mailing last week of an actual census form. But it just worries me that they might have been missed. So if you're a developer or working with affordable housing that you know is new, I really encourage you to do a little check-in to make sure that folks there received a form. And it's not for a lack of trying, it's just, you know, with building new things, the Census Bureau, you know, they cut off and they did their local update in 2018, and then they asked for an update in October of 2019. But I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me here. I mean, the call to action from my viewpoint is, you know, really help people who have those structural barriers, right? It's harder for them to respond. And I'm so grateful that you serve and work with folks that need the help to make sure they understand that it's important. I mean, with everything that's going on, even though we're sheltered in place, it's pretty stressful, and people are like, okay, I'm trying to stay safe, and filling out some, you know, paper form is just not really top of mind. So in closing, again, you need to know that your firsthand experience with these important hard to count folks in our communities across California, you're the ones that are going to make it happen. And I am so appreciative. In 2000 and 2010, it wasn't me who was getting everybody counted. It was all of you. It was all the community partners. And I have to tell you that, you know, keep up the great work. I know it's tough work. It's hard work. I know a lot of us are exhausted. I know working from home, we kind of lose boundaries, and we end up working more than we thought we did. So my daughter says, she's like, you seem to be working more than when you went to the office. But tell 10 people, use your personal networks as well as your work networks to get folks to respond. You know, follow us on social media, be the true source of trusted information that you are. And, you know, point people to the my 2020 census.gov website where they can be enumerated, or they can call. So anyway, I've talked on and on, but I'm here to answer some questions. So I'd love to open up and hear from you all.
Great, thank you so much, Director Katagi. Really appreciate your time and your expertise around these matters in terms of reaching hard to reach communities that need to be counted. So what we're going to go ahead and do is a brief Q&A section right now with the director before she has to hop off. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and submit them in the Q&A button feature at the bottom of the screen. One of the things that I do have a question for you right now, Director, is this move or call to action to move the deadline to be counted to October. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when it must have been March, I want to say 13th, around then, when, you know, a lot of the states went into shelter in place, the following week, the U.S. Census Bureau announced a pause in operations until we could, you know, find out better when it was safe. So, you know, their field offices, they sent everybody home because, again, you didn't want people working in close quarters. So that's extended, and that's also extended their timeline that they have to do things. So normally SelfResponse would have ended at the end of April, and they would have moved right into what they call non-response follow-up. It's when they knock on doors, and there were a number of other operations, which I'll touch on, that had to be moved or rescheduled. So now SelfResponse is extended to August 14th, and then they'll go all the way till Halloween, till October 31st, when they'll start to do non-response follow-up in September and October. So they have, the U.S. Census Bureau has the ability to move that, their timelines, because they have to, they're doing it, but there's some dependencies, right, of stuff that the data is needed for in those deadlines. So the deadlines to Congress and the deadlines for redistricting data, those all need to be moved as well. Otherwise, it really squeezes the time the Census Bureau has to do what they need to do after they finish data collection. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you. So we got a question from Diane Fisher, who is with Jewish Family Services of Silicon Valley. She asked, is there a new graphic that they can use for social media promotion, given that shelter in place makes it difficult to communicate with people person to person, that has the August 14th date so that, they can replace the April 1 instead?
Yes, so April 1 is actually just Census Day. That was sort of the point in time. They still want you to be able to say, where were you on April 1st? Like when you're dealing with like students, where were they on April 1st to be counted there? But the deadline does extend, and we can connect and send to you some better sort of social media posts that actually outline sort of the new extension of how long people have. People like to say, oh, the deadlines, just tell me when the deadline is. It's October 31st. But for me, that seems so far away. And I don't want people to be like, oh, I'm just going to wait till the fall. I really want people to take action now. And so I always mention August 14th as the deadline for self-response. And after that, somebody's going to come knock on your door. So that's really where I'm pushing. But we'll get those out to you, and they'll send those out to all of you since you've registered.
Great, thank you so much, Director. Are there any additional questions from the audience at this point? If there's additional questions that we come up with during the time that we're together and we're not able to answer or get to them, we'll definitely refer back to you, Director, and your team, and then we'll circle back with the registrants and participants, okay? But other than that, we're grateful to have you. Any parting words?
Just thank you all so much for your work. And I always like to quote my favorite play, which is, history is watching, right? History has its eyes on us. And I'm not going to give up my shot, right, to be counted. So I always tell people, rise up and be counted, right? This is history. And, 80 years from now, your ancestors will look back and they want to know that you were in the picture, that you were counted by the census and you were recognized. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Director. Have a good day.
Thanks.
So next, we're going to go ahead and pivot over to Marcy Kaplan, which is the sector's outreach manager with the California Complete Count office as well. Marcy?
Hi, thank you. Thank you everyone for having me on the webinar today. I'm Marcy Kaplan. I'm the sector's outreach manager for the California Complete Count office. I hope you and all of your families are doing well during this difficult time, and I want to thank you for your dedication to census. And if you could go to the next slide. And one more, thank you. As Ditas Katagi noted, our efforts are targeted at reaching the hardest to count communities, and she highlighted the many communities that you all reach. I wanted to emphasize that one of the keys to our success for current and past census efforts has been utilizing trusted messengers in our outreach efforts. Trusted messengers are essential to a complete count of Californians in 2020 because of their intimate knowledge of California, communities, and the needs of the communities they serve. Additionally, our sector outreach work highlights how we reach the hard to count communities and the importance of trusted places. Whether you hear about the census from a faith leader at a house of worship, a union member or leader at your local union hall, the owner at your local corner store, or from a landlord at your housing complex, communities are more likely to respond to the census when they are motivated by the people they trust. Here are the sectors and demographics that our partners across the state are targeting, and our office and partners have created collateral for these sectors and demographics. So I'm happy to share links with Mario to distribute afterwards as well. If you could go to the next slide. And there are many factors that make someone hard to count. People experiencing homelessness typically share certain characteristics that compound their risk of being undercounted, including transitory status. The Census Bureau attempts to count households by sending materials to every known residential address. And the person filling out the form is prompted to include all persons who live at that household, whether or not they're family members, and regardless of how long they've been staying or will stay there, as long as they don't have a usual home elsewhere or another household that would include them. The people experiencing homelessness are often temporary members of a household, and so it's vitally important to educate this population that the people who give them shelter include them on the census form completed for that household. Typically, people experiencing homelessness are in hard to reach locales. They are hard to locate through census methods, and part of which where they live. In California, a large portion of our unhoused population is unsheltered, whether they live on the street, in a car, in an abandoned building, or there's local ordinance that prohibit begging or sleeping in public, force people experiencing homelessness into less conspicuous locations. Internet access is another factor, as well as age. Young children are traditionally very hard to count, and about 22% of people nationally experiencing homelessness are children. And then the next slide. And also, for our unhoused population, there's many types of housing situations that would make someone hard to count. For example, crowded housing, many people of mixed family status in one household or many families in one household, renters, and hidden housing like a back house or an add-on. I also want to highlight what's at risk and an undercount for the communities that you serve. Private developers as well as public officials rely on census data to identify places where the population is growing and new investments in housing are needed. Many programs that impact people experiencing homelessness and affordable housing are funded based in whole or in part on census-derived data. So some examples are housing programs that provide rent payment assistance, such as Section 8 housing assistance, rural renter assistance program, and projects for assistance in transition from homelessness. Also, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Funds for permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and safe havens. It covers outreach, shelters, transitional housing, supportive services, short and medium-term rent subsidies, and permanent housing programs for those experiencing homelessness, and for some people at risk of homelessness. And other preventative programs like food assistance programs or Head Start. And so there's some additional examples of the link at the bottom. It looks like it's cut off, so I'll make sure Mario has that for those of you who would want some more examples. And then if we can go to the next slide. So the Census Bureau has an operation that's focused on enumerating people experiencing homelessness, and it's called service-based enumeration. And it provides an opportunity for people without conventional housing and people who may be experiencing homelessness to be counted in the census. Through this process, people who are not included in counts of traditional household type living arrangements or group quarters are enumerated where they stay or receive services at predetermined outdoor locations. So we really appreciate that the U.S. Census Bureau is taking a thoughtful approach that considers public health and safety in this unprecedented time for our communities, state, and nation. And so, as Judith noted, as with many components of the census operations, the U.S. Census Bureau has currently delayed the SV operation until strategies are determined to safely enumerate this population. So it was originally scheduled for the last 3 days in March. And so they will be providing new dates for the SBE enumeration. And just a little bit of detail you can see with those icons. Service-based enumeration is done over a 3-day period. The first day, the U.S. Census Bureau enumerates people at emergency shelters and transitional housing. The second day at mobile food vans and soup kitchens. And the third day at encampments and other outdoor locations. Many of you may have been involved in sharing location information with the Bureau for the SBE enumeration. And so thank you for that participation to ensure that they have a comprehensive workflow as they go out into the field or work with partners in any way as the new SBE dates are determined. And we could go to the next slide. And then just as everyone else, here are other ways that everyone, including people experiencing homelessness, can get counted online at my2020census.gov and by phone. And when completing the survey online, a census ID number will be requested. If you don't have a census ID number, which people experiencing homelessness who don't have a residential address would not have received a census ID, they can simply select the link under the login button that says, if you don't have a census ID, click here. And additionally, the U.S. Census Bureau sends households a paper form that Judith had shared with you all who didn't respond to the census. Those started going out on April 8th. So the next slide. And Judith Deedis touched on this, so I don't want to spend too much time, but this is the new construction note that she had highlighted for any new construction properties. And it just clarifies some of the dates for you if that's helpful. So any households in progress after March 1 and completed by October 2019 aren't included in the self-response operations. And so they, as Deedis mentioned, just got one notice in the mail. And so it's an additional opportunity if you're considering doing some more outreaches targeting the residents at housing complexes that may have been built during that time frame. And so we can go to the next slide. And I want to take a few minutes to share some information about Homebase, who many of you may know of their work in the Bay Area and statewide. They're our census office contractor working to ensure people experiencing homelessness are counted. They're providing technical assistance and support to counties, continuums of care, homeless service providers, and other partners, trainings for jurisdictions and other partners to support full census participation. And they're working to identify and mitigate census participation barriers for homeless service providers and have been really monumental to ensure that our partners and service providers are working with the Bureau and have shared their locations with the Bureau for the service-based enumeration. And Jesse Hewins, whose contact info is listed here, is the point person if you have additional questions. I also want to highlight the webpage that they created. There's some really great one-pagers that I'll show on the next slide that can be really helpful for any outreach at your affordable housing sites or other locations in the area. And we can go to the next slide. And so here are some of the great one-pagers that Homebase had created, including materials targeted at individuals who are doubled up and couch surfing, reminding them to ensure who they're staying with counts them on their census form. And there's also one-pagers on how people experiencing homelessness are enumerated and can respond to the census with some of the stuff that I went over in the PowerPoint. And just in closing, I want to highlight some examples of the partners that Homebase is working with. They had a small pool of funding to distribute as mini grants, and these are two of the organizations that received a mini grant from Homebase. And some of the ways that they're providing census outreach and education. And because some of the staff are on site, they're able to do a little bit of outreach during COVID-19. So at a community of friends in LA and Orange County, staff are doing outreach like providing flyers and information to raise awareness about the census and encourage recently housed clients and their supportive housing programs to complete the census. They've passed out and put up some of Homebase's flyers in their sites. And at LA Family Housing Corporation in LA County, staff are conducting outreach at their interim housing facilities and their resource centers where people can drop in and get connected to services, and through their street-based outreach that's continuing to provide incentives for people experiencing homelessness to complete the census. And then the next slide, I think, was just in closing. I just want to thank you all for having me on the webinar. Looking forward to answering any questions you have at the end of the webinar. And here's my contact information and our website should you have any additional questions after the webinar. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Marcy, for your time and information. So now we're going to go ahead and pivot over to Miguel Santiago, who is with the Santa Clara County Office of the Census as a community outreach specialist. Miguel?
Hi, thank you, Mario. Thank you, Marcy, for that great presentation. So my role as a community outreach specialist at the County of Santa Clara is to really make partnerships with community-based organizations and with the community and do outreach on the census that is both culturally competent and has the lens that we need in Santa Clara County. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, one more. Yeah, so the 2020 census rolls. You heard from the state of California what their role is, and then there's the Census Bureau and us. So in the top level, the US Census Bureau is the one who's putting on the show. They're really the ones who are driving the census and have all the decision power. Then the state of California has already stated their work and all the great stuff that they're doing. In the local government, us, Santa Clara County, we're really there to make sure that the messaging is culturally competent and the best it can be to reach Santa Clara County residents. We're also there to fill in any gaps that the state of California might have or any gaps that the Census Bureau might have. Next page, please. So some of the stuff that we've done and have been doing through the shelter in place is we were at a lot of community events. There's one of our co-workers, Eric Boycon. We also made sure that we had VTA have a census bus going around the county saying 2020 census is here. Through the shelter in place, we've actually we ordered a lot of bags that we were going to give out at events, but because all the events have been closed, we had a lot of bags in our office that didn't have homes. So we decided to get together with local food shops in hard to count areas that provide a space where monolingual Spanish speakers can get their food and give them some of our bags and be like, please hand this out to whenever somebody comes and shops in your local market. Other things that we have been doing since the shelter in place is we've hosted a telethon hall where community members can call in if they have any questions. We've coordinated a phone banking and text banking campaign that's reached more than 300,000 residents in Santa Clara County. Next slide, please. And speaking of Santa Clara County, this is a California Hard to Count Index map by Census Tract. So this is what we kind of used as our guiding map on where we thought the hard to count population is and where we did the planning, where our community-based organization partnerships were going to be, where they could focus on. And I'll talk more about what our plan was and how it's shifted a little bit later, but I just wanted to have this map as a reference. Next page, please. And this is our Santa Clara County self-response by census tract. So as you can see, the lighter it is, the lighter brown it is, the less response rate has been done. And then the darker bluer it is, the higher the response rate is. One thing that you can clearly see is that Alviso at the top is sitting in the 0 to 15%. That is because the Census Bureau and Alviso, and this is the only area in Santa Clara County where it happens, does update and leave, where they don't, because of the mail system in Alviso, the PO box system, they go to every home to leave a census survey for people to take it. Because of the COVID crisis, that has been delayed, and residents of Alviso who have not received anything in the mail from the Census Bureau as of right now. So if community-based organizations or anybody's getting a call saying, hey, I haven't received anything in the mail, they might be residents of Alviso. We're telling those residents to please fill out their census form. It's better, our motto is get counted, so it's better that everybody gets counted. Next slide, please. And then zooming in more, we can see here where is the hardest to count, where the self-response rate is the lowest in the Bay Area. We can see it's concentrated around downtown San Jose, where there's a lot of density and diversity, as well as over here on the east and south side of San Jose. One of the hardest to count areas is up here in Palo Alto, where you can see it's like the Stanford zone is really hard to count. That has been hard to count it was hard to count in 2000 and 2010, and we see that it's hard to count now. One of the major hurdles during this shelter in place is that it's hard for students to know where they should be counted. So if they should be counted where they were doing at school, but we can see the areas around San Jose State too have a low self-response rate. That could be attributed to students moving back home, not answering their census form before they left. Next slide, please. So we wanted to show you a couple videos of what our marketing campaign has been. If you could please play them.
My name is Reverend Jethro Moore II. I want to tell all of my Santa Clara County, all of my people who are undocumented, be counted, do not be afraid. Santa Clara County, our leaders and our community will be there to help you and be safe and feel comfortable in this county. We want you to be counted. We want you to have resources. We care for you. We love you and we need you here. And we respect your presence. So stand up, be counted. We're standing right there with you and we won't turn our backs. My name is.
And so, yeah, we have another video, and this was from Adam Cosner, who is part of the Santa Clara County Fire Department.
My name is Adam Cosner, and I'm a captain with the Santa Clara County Fire Department. The census ensures that we have better roads, which minimizes our response times. It'll give us the ability to be more efficient and more effective in our response to not only medical emergencies, but also structure fires, vehicle accidents. Without an adequate count and without adequate funding, we can't respond as efficiently as we could be. We're trained to help, and we help keep the county safe. Count the fire department in. Take the census.
So those were just two of our videos that we've done. We want to really highlight that we want people to feel safe to do the census and empower them to do the census. We also want to let them know where that funding money is going to go and how it impacts our communities. Next page, please. As far as in the community, what our outreach has been is we've partnered with community-based organizations or CBOs that have existing trusted relationships with various hard-to-count communities. They are the trusted messengers in Santa Clara County, and they'll be executing the majority of the field work for their census efforts. We've had 3 rounds of funding sources here in Santa Clara County, one from the state, and that was administered through the United Way of the Bay Area. Also ourselves in the county, and that was through the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And then the Silicon Valley Community Foundation also did a wave of funding as well. Next slide, please. So CBOs given grants to do outreach in 3 different areas. The first was canvassing / person-to-person outreach, where we targeted 75 of the census tracts that we believe to be hard to count. So we were going to do a door-to-door canvassing campaign that we're going to reach people in their communities to try to ensure them that it's safe to be counted. Now that has shifted to text messaging and phone banking Santa Clara County residents. As I said before, we sent more than 200,000 text messages, and our CBO our community-based organizations are phone banking Santa Clara County residents. We also had questionnaire assistance centers planned. Those questionnaire assistance centers would be operated by the community-based organizations, where people could drop in and if they have a census question or to complete the form on a kiosk. Now that shelter in place, we've shifted over to a virtual questionnaire assistance center where community members can call in or watch a census seminar through some of these CBOs. If they have any questions. I know that Luna, Latinos Unidos for New America, is working on having a webinar next Friday. Also, media and social media, CBOs creating a social media content to inspire census participation. And so that's been ongoing. Reaching the unhoused community, we are leveraging existing CBO partnerships. Opening Doors 2020 operates a weekly meal service at 2nd and St. James, and we are partnering with them so that they can have conversations with community members on why the census is important. Not only that, but we're also, because of our questionnaire assistance center, kiosks aren't operational right now, have a lot of iPads that we can lend out to Opening Doors so that if anybody needs to fill out the census, they have an easy way to do it right then and there. Gardner Health Service and EAH Housing are other CBOs we're actively engaging with. We're also coordinating with San Jose City and Santa Clara County temporary shelter locations to train staff members about the census, to provide iPads for residents to fill out the census, and to provide supplies such as first aid kits and hand sanitizers to the residents. We're also advocating for the targeted non-shelter outdoor location count to happen. We need to make sure that people are counted in Santa Clara County, and getting rid of the tinsel count would be a travesty for us. Next slide, please. This is some of the work our CBOs have done. Siren on the right here, going to Mercados, and then Aluna has El Amor y el Censo en Tiempos del Coronavirus miniseries, where they've published a skits on their page on census and the time during COVID. Some of the work that has been done up there before shelter in place, the Reaching Community Center had census meetings where they invited community members to talk about it during dinner. And down below is some of the art that has been created by children for census. Next page, please. So what are some opportunities to participate? Recruit for census positions. The U.S. Census Bureau is still hiring for enumerators. That's kind of been something that people might be grateful to have now during the COVID crisis. They're flexible hours. Enumerators are paid $30 an hour. Please, we want community members to have these positions, because when enumerators are knocking on doors, if they're community members, they have more of a chance of getting a warm reception at the door, as well as having the door open in the first place. Incorporate census outreach and education efforts in your existing structure. Also assist with delivering tested messages. Encourage your friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors to complete their census. You can also become a census champion and help the Santa Clara County team reach more people by taking the pledge to be a census champion. And so if you have any questions, here's my contact information, but I think we will have time for questions and answers as well.
Great, thank you so much, Miguel, really appreciate it. So we're gonna go ahead and shift over to questions and answers with the audience members. We have a few questions that have come in. One of them is from Bernadine. What is the timeline for assistance centers to open?
So we don't, that's the Census Bureau for the, okay, so we don't have a timeline yet. As soon as the shelter in place gets lifted, we'll be working with our CBO community-based organizations to open up those questionnaire assistance centers as soon as possible.
Great. So this has been touched upon by a few members or speakers, I should say, just now. And so the proposed citizenship question by the presidential administration earlier this year caused concern for many immigrant communities, particularly those who are undocumented or in mixed status families. Can you clarify the status of that for our audience? And have you seen this continue to pose a problem in the counting this year, even though the citizenship question won't be asked?
Yes, so there is no citizenship question on the census form. It was struck down by the Supreme Court last year, and the the administration decided not to purse it, and it is not included in the census form. The census will never ask about your citizenship status. But we saw that it had its intended purposes. It was there to scare the community, and the damage of even proposing the question had already been done. And we've seen that people are distrustful of the federal government, and even without the census form, it's been kind of an uphill battle to convince people that filling out the census is something that they should do.
Got it. So after the census count is complete, what happens next? How soon after that will the data be used to redraw political lines and used to determine funding for local jurisdictions?
That's one of the tricky questions because we saw that the Census Bureau has pushed the timeline back to October 31st. So they have the control and power to change timelines within the year of 2020. So this was their own deadline that they can change, but that doesn't extend the period which they have to then get the results to the president and to Congress for redistricting. Their original timeline had all census activities ceasing on August, and then they had from August till mid-December to compile all that data and send it into Congress and the president. And now because it has shifted back, they want authority from the Congress to be able to then have more time to get back the information and data to the president. They want 4 months, and if that happens, then we would have redistricting later on in 2021.
Got it. Marcy, is there anything to add to that response?
Yeah, and just to add, the proposed time that the Bureau shows for that, if it continues on the timeline that they're proposing to Congress, would be July 31st when the data would come back to the states.
Got it. Thank you. There's a couple of questions relating to the distribution of collateral. So what we can go ahead and do is share the contact information with the registrants so that they can follow up and get some of those collateral materials so that they can continue to do community outreach in their neighborhoods. And I think that there's a number of folks who are interested in ensuring that people are counted and are willing to volunteer. How do folks go about that?
So if you want to volunteer, you can sign up to become a census champion on our site. So our site is scgov.org/census. And there you can sign up to become a census champion.
Got it. Thank you. Are there any other additional questions from the audience? Marcy, anything that you'd like to add or that we missed?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that the U.S. Census Bureau field operations, like update leave, are depending on state reopening order. And so that's launched back up again in certain states, and we're still waiting here in California on that. And that also questionnaire, assistance centers from the U.S. Census Bureau are being held online via webinar. And just like Miguel noted, for Santa Clara, additionally across the state in regions where stay-at-home orders are lifted, our partners are exploring how they may be able to provide questionnaire assistance in a safe manner.
Got it. I think that we got a question from Christine about Morgan Hill and some of the bags for their food delivering and pickup efforts. And so we'll definitely connect Miguel with you offline so that you can get the resources that you need for your community. Any additional questions from the audience? I noticed that Director Katagi is still with us. Director Katagi, do you have any closing remarks for us?
Yes, I just want to say again, thank you, and keep in conversation with us. We love to hear what's going on really down on the ground because it helps us advocate, to the U.S. Census Bureau and then to share with other regions who might be facing the same things. So thank you again for pulling this together.
Of course, and thank you and your team for being really responsive and helping us put this together. What we're going to go ahead and do is send it out, the video recording, to all of the registrants that had signed up for today's webinar so that they can review it, as well as sending it over to our affordable housing developer partners so that they can distribute to their resident services staff and as well as the residents, in the hope that they would complete the census if they haven't already done so. We have another week or so for Affordable Housing Month here in May, and we have a number of events that we still have that are really going to be important webinars around affordable housing and homeless prevention, and so we invite you all to be a part of that as well. and visit our website at siliconvalleyathome.org. And I look under the Affordable Housing Week of events for further information about that. But I just want to thank on behalf of Silicon Valley at Home everyone for participating, for taking time to be part of this crucial conversation and ensuring that everyone in Santa Clara County is counted. Again, thank you so much, Director Katagi, to your team, to Miguel Santiago from the Census office as well, and have a great day. Thank you.